All right, welcome back. So now I wanted to talk about Bitcoin. So some of you may have heard of Bitcoin. Some of you may even own some Bitcoin. Some of you may have owned Bitcoin in the past and then sold them and, well, now kind of wish that you held on to it. Some of you may have bought some, sold some, lost money, or maybe you've just seen news articles about it. So the first question that comes to mind is, what is Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin is a digital decentralized currency which is not under any sort of control of a bank or a government. It is truly decentralized. And so it is a cryptocurrency. It is a sequence of letters and numbers, which uh, each one is going to be unique, and you find it by what's known as mining. So this was created in 2008 by a guy by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. And what he created, he actually published a white paper on this, a research paper, and he detailed a mathematical proof to generate unique numbers and unique strings. And he called these bitcoins or crypto coins. And he created this and um, set a limit to the maximum number of coins that could ever be created, 21 million. But he didn't just have all 21 million created at once. Instead, what he did is he modeled it after the rate of gold as it's getting dug out of the ground. That's where he came up with the 21 million. But in order to find new Bitcoins, you have to mine for them. And the mining is solving a bunch of mathematical problems. And then every so often, somebody stumbles upon a new solution. And that's called mining Bitcoins. Um, Once you have a Bitcoin, then you can actually do stuff with that. You can trade it to other people. You can trade it to an exchange and get money back. You can trade it to an exchange and get other cryptocurrencies back. It doesn't have to be Bitcoins. But all of those transactions are what's part of a blockchain. And this is a blockchain that keeps a history or a ledger of every single Bitcoin transaction. And that's how you kind of guarantee that, like if I just happen to come up with a random sequence of letters and numbers and I say, okay, I suddenly now have 5,000 of these random sequence of letters and numbers, well, that has to exist on a blockchain or a ledger somewhere. So it's decentralized, which means that the federal government or some business does not maintain control over this blockchain, but rather it's there's people out there which they kind of keep this blockchain updated, and they are constantly checking the transactions on there and verifying with everybody else that, hey, all these transactions are consistent. And so that is where this decentralized idea comes about, is it's not one person saying that whether or not these transactions are valid or this person has enough money. Rather, it's several people all over the place are kind of verifying this information to basically say, yes, these are valid transactions. And I say that's useful for semi-anonymous payments across the internet. And so the key thing about Bitcoin is you have a number, a sequence of letters and numbers, you transfer it to somebody else or transfer part of it to somebody else, and nobody actually knows who you are. You're just a sequence of letters and number. So it's semi-anonymous in the fact that you do not have to give anybody your personal information. You don't have to say, hey, my name is Jeremy and I am paying this person 5 Bitcoins. Um, then it would not be anonymous at all. But it's semi-anonymous because given enough time, since everything is on this blockchain, this ledger, and that ledger is all public information, you can build a profile of somebody. You can trace payments to and from locations. For the average user, they're never going to do that. But if you are the federal government and you're really trying to find somebody, they have the resources to track payments across the world. And there's been a lot of news articles out there. What was it? It was Ross Ulbricht. He was the creator of Silk Road, which was darknet market, which only accepted Bitcoin payments because they believed that it was completely anonymous at the time. Well, the federal government was able to track payments there and start to learn who was buying and selling stuff and eventually trace it back to individual people. And that is part of how Ross Ulbricht managed to get arrested, is because the FBI was able to trace Bitcoin payments that he had made and trace it back to him. And once they figured out what his Bitcoin wallet was, then they knew who he was and they were able to see what he was doing. That's also been the case for some ransomware gangs out there. The group which shut down the Colonial Pipeline, I believe it was several months ago, that was the gas pipeline along the east coast of the United States, which was under attack from a ransomware gang, and they shut it down and demanded uh, several $1 million worth of payment to unlock all that information. Well, the FBI was able to trace the payments that were made and actually managed to recover most of the money. And so the malicious actors did not actually get that money. So this Bitcoin, since it is decentralized, it's actually useful in company or countries with hyperinflation, such as Venezuela, Argentina, and more recently, I think it was it it's a Latin America country, begins with an S. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but they officially adopted Bitcoin as one of their official currencies. That country that did it, they're experiencing um, troubles with their banks and troubles with their money, and so the government was like, it was basically saying, okay, we're going to adopt Bitcoin, and everything can you can use our official currency, and you can use Bitcoin because that is now also an official currency. So countries with hyperinflation, where the value of their currency falls dramatically, Bitcoin is seeing more and more use in those countries because the value is not as volatile as their currency, which those of you who know stuff about Bitcoin, that may seem kind of backwards, but that is why Bitcoin is seeing more use in those countries. Also because Bitcoin is worldwide, whereas those countries' currencies is limited to their specific country. So Bitcoins. You can buy fractions of a Bitcoin. So just like you can get dollars or you can get cents, you can get 0.00000001 of a Bitcoin. I'm not sure how small you can actually get, but you do not have to buy one Bitcoin. You can buy half of a Bitcoin or a millionth of a Bitcoin, and that will still have a same value. Initially, Bitcoins were created by mining. However, that is not really feasible anymore. Um, so originally, in order to find Bitcoins or create Bitcoins, you basically had to mine them, which is solving these mathematical problems. And so in the early days, you could use a regular computer to do this. And then as more and more people started to learn about Bitcoin, and they started to see that, hey, we can use our computer, which isn't doing anything now, to try to get some free money, well, the difficulty gets harder. And that's the thing, is with Bitcoin, over time, as you're mining, the difficulty to try to find new Bitcoins doubles. And then it doubles. And it doubles every so often. I can't remember how often it actually doubles, but it does double the difficulty. And so eventually, people were discovering that, hey, CPUs are really not that good. I mean, it's solving a mathematical problem, it's an algorithm, it works great, but it's just not that fast. And they started to turn to GPUs or graphics cards. And so if you remember back on week one, I talked about the graphics cards and what they're great for. Well, when you're playing a game, you're going to be solving a bunch of problems and doing a bunch of physics calculations, a bunch of other calculations. And so these graphics cards are really great at crunching numbers. And so people would start to use their graphics card. And initially, people would have one graphics card, or they might have a server with a couple of graphics cards in there running. But then you got people with a lot of money who wanted to mine a lot of Bitcoins. And so they would build entire servers with only graphics cards in there. And that worked for a while. And then the difficulty got harder, graphics cards got to be more expensive, and so there were companies which came up which developed what was known as an ASIC, ASIC, and it's this device specifically designed to mine Bitcoins. That's the entire purpose of it. And so people would buy these ASIC devices and use them. Well, more recently, the price of graphics cards have been exploding in value. The MSRP for a graphics card at one point used to be $300. Now that exact same graphics card is over $1,000, even though it's the exact same card. And it's because the price of Bitcoin has climbed in value. So the price of Bitcoin is actually very volatile. So if I actually look at, oops, there we go, Bit, yes, I know, remind me later. There we go. Bitcoin or price history. All right, so we can look at the Bitcoin price history, and you can see how much it actually goes. So so this started back in 2008. Back in 2008, the value or the price of a coin or the value of a Bitcoin was, I mean, less than a penny because nobody really used it. You had a couple of people who had Bitcoins and they said, okay, we're going to use Bitcoins. We don't really think they're worth anything. In fact, one of the first transactions using Bitcoin is they bought a pizza. And I think they bought a pizza with something like 45 Bitcoins. And so back then, 45 Bitcoins was probably $5, somewhere around there. But they still bought a pizza with it. The person who actually delivered pizza agreed to that, and they did that. And you can kind of see that it was, well, it was 145 back in 2013, kind of jumped up here, and then it dropped back down, hovering about 150 Bitcoin. And it kind of stayed that way for years. And then there was a spike. And this spike was back in 2018. And it jumped up to almost $20,000. And then it kind of dropped back down to what I picture as a more sane value than $20,000 Bitcoin. And it kind of hovered around, well, $10,000 or less. And you kind of see it jumping up and everything. And then it kind of went insane. And that was the beginning of this year. Well, beginning to mid part of this year, it actually peaked to over $60,000 of Bitcoin. So if you think about it, the pizza transaction using what, 45 Bitcoins, that transaction these days is now millions of dollars. And then you see that it dropped off to $30,000 a Bitcoin, and then it jumped back up. Right now, it is about $42,500 a coin. It peaked at $60,000. I actually updated this PowerPoint slide because I had to check it. I used this same PowerPoint slides last semester in spring, and at that time, it had settled in at around $8,000 a Bitcoin. So that just shows you how much it goes up and down. It is not stable. So the US dollar is much more stable. The value is never going to jump up from, say, $10,000 to $60,000 in a matter of weeks. If the US dollar does that, that's really, really bad. But Bitcoin is kind of in its infancy. Nobody really knows how much it's worth. Nobody really knows where it's going to go. And it jumps up and down. Now, some of you may wonder, why does it jump up and down? Why is it so volatile? Well, some people like to buy Bitcoins and hold on to them in case that the value increases. Some businesses have started to accept Bitcoin. Elon Musk he announced that Tesla was going to accept Bitcoins for all of their cars. After he did that, the price of Bitcoin jumped up because people started to see it as a legitimate currency. Then come to find out, he announced that, nope, we aren't actually going to accept Bitcoin, and the price dropped a little bit. China, they were one of the big drivers for Bitcoin, the Chinese people, and they were actually largely responsible for the price of video cards going so expensive? Well, the Chinese government just recently announced a ban on any sort of cryptocurrency in their country, and that is kind of why the value has started to drop down. This happened more recently. I think it was right about here where they announced it, and that's why the value has dropped back down again. So people get super excited about it, the price goes up, and then governments or businesses start to say, oh, well, we aren't going to accept it, then the price goes down. So that's why it's volatile. It's not a stable currency. One of the problems with Bitcoins is it can get lost. So the price of a dollar, I mean, you're backed by the government. There's this thing known as FDIC. So if a bank suddenly goes out of business, FDIC is Federal Deposit Insurance, and it basically guarantees that your you will get up to $100,000 of your money back in the case of a bank going out of business or losing your money somehow. Now, over $100,000, and they may have actually bumped it up to $250,000, but above that amount, you're kind of out of luck, but you are still guaranteed to get back up to that amount of money. Bitcoin, on the other hand, since it is decentralized and there is no government backing it, if you lose your Bitcoins, they're gone. There have been people who had their Bitcoin stolen. There have been people who put their money into what's known as an exchange. And so Mt. Gox was one of the largest. This was based out of Japan, and they were at the time the largest Bitcoin exchange in the world. And overnight, they went offline and they announced that they lost 100 at the time $145 million worth of Bitcoins. So they claim that hackers got in there and stole all the Bitcoins that they had. And because of that, because they didn't have $145 million sitting around, they went out of business. And all the people who actually stored their Bitcoins on there lost all those Bitcoins. Um, One of the other examples is somebody stored Bitcoins on a hard drive and encrypted that hard drive and forgot the password. And suddenly, even though the coins are on there, since they don't know the password, they can't get those coins back. Or another guy, he actually accidentally threw the hard drive away and it's in a landfill somewhere. So if you find the right landfill, you might find a hard drive with a whole bunch of Bitcoins that you could then use. So they can actually be lost. So they are not a currency which is backed by insurance or anything like that. It is very much if you happen to accidentally give out your password to your Bitcoin wallet, then you could very much lose hundreds or thousands or millions of dollars in an instant. And some countries have started to implement regulations. So I mentioned China. China is banned or has officially banned all cryptocurrency in their entire country. India, they have started to introduce regulations to curb the adoption of cryptocurrencies. The United States, they actually have laws or they've been talking about implementing some laws to try to limit the volatility of cryptocurrencies and limit the abuse of it. Because since it is semi-anonymous, one of the driving uses of it was to buy less than legal uh, things. So I mentioned Silk Road, and that was an online marketplace running on the dark web, which, if you don't know what the dark web is, it uses a special browser known as a Tor browser to actually access this kind of secret area of the internet. And from there, you can buy things like drugs. You can buy almost any sort of drugs. And in order to pay for it, it required Bitcoin or some sort of cryptocurrency. And so that kind of drove the adoption of Bitcoin early on was for illegal purposes. Nowadays, it's used for much more than just illegal purposes, but there is still a large underground marketplace which still uses cryptocurrencies and Bitcoins. So regulations start to come into play, which will limit the use of Bitcoin in some manner. Um, but with Bitcoin, many other cryptocurrencies have spun up. Things like Ethereum or Litecoin, Ripple, Monero. Um, Dogecoin is one of the more popular ones now, and that one again is because of Elon Musk. So there's several other types of cryptocurrencies out there which um, have become popular or a little bit more popular, but really the first one out there is Bitcoin. And even though Bitcoin may not survive and it may end up getting replaced, it still is what started this cryptocurrency craze. And so I, I, I I enjoy Bitcoin. I don't actually own any Bitcoins, but I enjoy the technology behind it. But explaining it, especially on just text slides and me talking about it, is a little bit difficult to wrap your head around. So definitely watch this YouTube video. It isn't that long. I think it's 5 or 10 minutes, but they actually explain it much better than I can. And they have much better graphics than I do because, well, I'm not a graphics person. But definitely, if you have questions about Bitcoin or you want to learn even more about how it actually works, especially the blockchain, watch this video. I highly, highly encourage it. So that's everything I have for Bitcoin and e-commerce. I hope you enjoyed this, and thanks for listening.